Welcome back to the Grease Goblins Rereads channel. Today's video is a very special one. This is probably my second favorite chapter in the entire series with the Renly speech, or Catelyn 3, A Clash of Kings. And what I find is so great about A Clash of Kings is, yes, A Game of Thrones in my reread. I love doing that reread. Made me appreciate that book a lot more. The thing with A Game of Thrones for me is a lot of my favorite chapters of that book are definitely in the back half of the book. Whereas in A Clash of Kings, I feel like you have a lot of great chapters all over the book, right? Kind of towards the end of the book, you have the House of the Undying, the Battle of Blackwater. Towards the middle, you have this chapter with Renly's Peach. Early on in the book, you have a lot of the great Tyrion and Arya chapters. So again, a lot of stuff I really like about this book is that a lot of its quality is kind of spread out throughout the book. So get settled in. This will be a little bit longer than the last couple of videos. I have a longer script for this, and also this is just a chapter I'd love to talk about. So let's get into Catelyn 3, A Clash of Kings, and page 352. The meeting place is a grassy clearing with pale gray mushrooms and tree stumps where trees had been felled. And we get in this page that Stannis has cut down this grove of trees that is near Storm's End so that he can actually have a siege of Storm's End. And this tells you a lot about Stannis from the point of view of, like, you think about it already, he's already going away from the new gods, the gods of his family. He's going towards R'hllor. Now he's also taking away these ancestral trees that have been here for years and years and years, and they've just been simply used, and the beauty of this land has been stripped down to fund this siege. It has a lot of parallels in terms of Tolkien's writing about Isengard and, the idea of industrialization and how that affects, nature and all of that stuff. It's a really bleak way to start the chapter, right? Because we're going to talk a lot about in this chapter with materialism and how both Stannis and Renly view that. You think about what Stannis is willing to do so that he can, go onto the throne. And we know it's not for his own personal gain, it's because of his beliefs, duty, things like that. But it's a really bleak way to start the chapter. Hallis, Malin, and Catelyn arrive first, alone between the two armies, with the stark direwolf banner. The smell of the nearby sea is strong due to an eastern wind. One of the main big things about Storm's End is that it has these strong winds. The sea is very strong near it. And that's one of the things that leads Stannis' mother and father to actually die on Shipwrecker Bay. But we're also going to learn a little bit more about the lore of Storm's End in this chapter. Catelyn reflects on Ned's past victory at Storm's End, which was bloodless, which is kind of crazy if you want to consider, the ending of the siege of Storm's End during Robert's Rebellion, because Mace Tyrell had been sieging it the entire time. Is it really a victory for Ned? The war was over, the Targaryens were defeated, the Tyrells had no reason to fight Ned Stark. It really wasn't a victory for Ned. If anything, it was a victory for Stannis. Stannis held the castle under terrible conditions, and he gets none of the credit. And so even here, George slyly throws this in here, that even a character like Catelyn gives no credit to Stannis for him holding the siege together. She gives it to her husband, which we understand, right? Because she has much more of a connection with Ned and all of that stuff. And that's what she's kind of been told, right? That it was Ned's victory, and Stannis gets none of the credit. You even think about the way Joffrey's parentage has come out. It all kind of stems from, well, Stannis kind of found it out first. He gave that information to Jon Arryn, and then it goes to eventually Ned. Ned is the person that kind of reveals this news to really the public, more or less. Even though Stannis is the one that kind of spreads it even further, right? So Ned is going to kind of get that credit, not Stannis. It's kind of the way Stannis has been viewed his entire life. He's been completely overlooked and overshadowed. But Catelyn prays that this meeting will achieve a similar bloodless outcome. Her liegemen, including Sir Wendell Manderly, think her journey is dangerous and unnecessary. That's kind of how I would feel if I was one of these northern men. Like, why are they here? This is something that is taking an unnecessary risk of their lives, this conflict between the Baratheon brothers. But Catelyn is much more rational, right? She understands what this could lead to, right? These two could easily band together and they would be a powerful dynamic between Stannis and Renly. That's what Catelyn's trying to do. And Catelyn also, doesn't want these two brothers to killing each other, being a kinslayer, something that's terribly looked upon in Westeros. But Catelyn insists that all are at risk and that she must fulfill Robb's command to speak for him and give the Stark, perspective and all of that stuff into the conflict. She acknowledges the difficulty of making peace between Stannis and Renly, but believes it necessary for the realm, which is 100% correct. It's going to be a difficult thing to do, and also it is very necessary to get this war kind of concluding quicker than it would without them being united. Catelyn sees Storm's End rising in the distance, massive against the sky, with Stannis' encircling army appearing tiny below. Remember, Stannis has maybe a few thousand men. He does not command that large of an army. And so when you have Storm's End, one of the mightiest castles within Westeros, it's kind of the same idea as like Arya has with Harrenhal, but to a larger extent here with Stannis' forces at Storm's End. And we're going to get a lot of the lore of Storm's End, which is great. We don't really go to Storm's End outside of this one time. We will go there in Winds of Winter, so we'll learn more about Storm's End, you would think. But for the most part, this is the only time we're ever at Storm's End, so George tries to establish a little bit of lore for it. Catelyn notes that Storm's End faces the sea, hidden from view with pale gray stone walls. Legend says the castle was built by Doran, the first Storm King who loved Olenna, daughter of sea and wind gods. On their wedding night, Olenna's parents unleashed storms that destroyed Doran's hold and killed many. Olenna protected Doran, who survived and then vowed to defy the gods and rebuild. It's very interesting because when I was reading this story again on my reread, it kind of reminded me a little bit about Euron and how Euron openly defies the gods and all of those things. Kind of the same idea here with Doran, albeit with Doran, it's much different, right? The circumstances of their motivations are a lot different, but it does remind me a lot about that. Now, remember, the Baratheons were not the original rulers of Storm's End. That was actually House Durrandon. They were killed off during Aegon's conquest. Well, again, they were kind of killed off because the Baratheon line kind of marries into the Durrandon line. So the Durrandon name like ends, but their bloodline continues. That's the best way to kind of phrase that. Catelyn notes that he built 6 castles, each destroyed by the storms, and despite pleas from lords, priests, and small folk, Doran persisted and built a 7th, strongest of all. Think about the manpower that this is costing. It's just something where it seems unnecessary, right? Why fight against these forces of either nature or gods when you could just move somewhere else? And it's the pride of man. And so for Doran, this works out, right? He does have his castle that ends up being able to be built. But think about the men and women and children that all died because of him being prideful. I think that's something that's a little swept under the rug here is that, oh, it is a massive feat of Storm's End being built, and there's a lot of mystery with actually the building of Storm's End. But think about they were being unnecessarily killed because of this conflict with nature and or the gods. But this is when we get an interesting little tidbit about Storm's End. There are said to be some stories that say the children of the forest or a prophetic boy, Bran the Builder, helped him build it, which is really interesting, right? How would a boy and Bran the Builder tell him how to build it? And there's been a lot of speculation is there some sort of manipulation going on here with like Bran? Is he going back on the past and influencing this castle's building for some particular reason? We're not sure as to what that could possibly be. If this is even some sort of intervention by maybe a Bran Stark in the past, maybe this is just the children of the forest for helping this Bran the Builder. There's a lot of questions that we have with some of these really awesome, castles or buildings within Westeros. Another one of those notably being in Old Town. But the 7th castle withstood the storms, and Doran and Olenna lived there until their deaths. Storm's End endured for centuries, protected by a 100-foot-high curtain wall with no gaps for wind. The wall is 40 to 80 feet thick, with a core of sand and rubble for reinforcement, and inside the walls, buildings are shielded from wind and wave. It's quite an impressive feat, because when you think about Storm's End, you think about its location, for it to actually even be stable is incredible. And you think about ever trying to siege the castle, just in general, with how powerful it seems to be and overwhelming. It is something that it makes it where it kind of is something where it makes you question how would somebody ever take it by force, right? We never actually see it taken by force in the main story, and we rarely ever see it switch hands, right? You see it switch hands a couple times. One during Aegon's conquest, one which is about to happen here with Stannis, and then apparently another one with Jon Con. So really interesting to think about. But there is one massive round drum tower, windowless towards the sea, serving multiple purposes and topped with battlements resembling a spiked fist. I kind of think about this being almost Doran like having a middle finger to the gods. As we get at page 354. Hal Mullen alerts Catelyn as 2 riders approach from the camp beneath Storm's End. Catelyn assumes one is Stannis, though the banner they carry is not Baratheon's traditional sigil. Another thing that's going to isolate people from Stannis' cause is he doesn't have the sigil that Robert had worn and all of those things, right? So you have one person who kind of has that middle kid syndrome where he's going as far away as Robert as he possibly can. And you have the youngest being as close to the oldest as possibly can, right? Renly looks exactly like Robert. He has the traditional crown stag sigil for Robert. It's really interesting when you think about the differences between Stannis and Renly. But it also tells you another thing. Stannis doesn't really care about this waiting game and all this stuff. Like Renly is somebody that is very kind of prickly when it comes to this. He wants to be the person that is not waiting and he will come second. So he makes Stannis kind of a little bit more on edge, having to wait for Renly. Catelyn knows that the banner is bright yellow with a red device that she cannot yet distinguish. Renly had told Catelyn he would arrive last. He would not wait on his brother, like I had already mentioned. Catelyn waits knowing she does not need to play king's games, right? Catelyn is just an envoy. She doesn't care about her pride or any of this stuff. She wants to get to the root of the issue that these two brothers are fighting and could either kill one of the others or whatnot. She's here to try and get the best outcome for the North as possible. And for the North right now, the best interest is that Stannis and Renly work together. And I want to point this out before we get to the meeting of Stannis and Renly. We give Catelyn a lot of grief about her decisions that she makes and some of her actions. But one thing I love about Catelyn's character is she's really good at being a logical mediator in a lot of ways, right? In a lot of ways, when Catelyn is not made into emotional decisions that she's basing off her own emotion, she makes relatively good decisions. There's two really that I think come to mind. One of them is during the King of the North chapter in A Game of Thrones, where Catelyn is saying we should maybe sue for peace and all of that stuff. And the same idea will be present here. There's emotions that are high with all of these people, and she will be kind of our vessel of logic. As the riders near, she sees Stannis wearing a crown of red gold shaped like flames. He wears simple clothing aside from a jewel-studded belt and ruby-hilted sword. His banner shows a red heart surrounded by fire, with a small crowned stag inside the heart. Stannis is dressing very plainly. That really reflects Stannis as a person. He doesn't care about, these flashy clothing and dressing richly to just show your power that way. Those are just not things he cares about. Whereas when we see Renly, it's the complete opposite. His standard bearer is a woman in red robes, a red priestess, likely from the Free Cities. We know this to be Melisandre, of course, but this is going to be very weird, right? The person that Stannis chooses to come with him is actually this priestess. It tells you Stannis's, I would say, I would say, for the most part, I would say that it's showing Stannis's power, his weapon, right? His weapon is going to be Melisandre. That's what he's going to use on Renly. And it just kind of shows that and backs that up. It tells you the different paths that Stannis and Renly have taken. Stannis greets Catelyn with formal chill, noting her presence at Storm's End with surprise. There's a lot of things here that I want to talk about. I think Stannis is somebody that is a bit socially awkward. He's somebody that is not the best when talking with, I would say, high ladies or even, higher lords and ladies. He's just not good at that thing. And you can kind of tell that in the way that he talks to Catelyn. Like, he just doesn't kind of respond as a normal human being you think would. And so I find that really interesting. It's another character flaw that I think makes Stannis really interesting. But also, if you're Stannis, you're going to be thinking, why is Catelyn here? Right? Why is there a Stark envoy here? Of all places at Storm's End, it's going to be really interesting. Catelyn responds in kind, but she specifically notes Lord Stannis when she greets him, which is really interesting because when we go back and remember when she introduces herself to actually Renly, Brienne is the first person to correct her and all of those things. We see that king title, it is something that is very much, frowned upon to not call him king, whereas Stannis doesn't really seem to care, as he doesn't correct her on the titles. He offers condolences for Ned Stark's death, right? That's the proper thing to say if you're Stannis. Offer your condolences for Catelyn right now, the situation that she's in. But then he says a weird thing. He says that Ned was no friend of his, though. Why would you say this, right? Like, that's what I mean, where I think that Stannis is kind of socially awkward to a degree. And you kind of look at that here and you go, he started right. And then he said something where it's like, that's something that should be in your head. You don't really need to say that. But Stannis is somebody that's very blunt. He says what's on his mind. He doesn't hold back. Catelyn replies that Ned was not Stannis' enemy and had helped lift the siege of Storm's End. And this is a really bad way to start the meeting. So not only do you have Stannis, in a lot of ways, kind of taking a shot at Ned, who is now dead. Not great look. If you're Catelyn, you have the right response. Again, at the beginning, and at the end, it's wrong. Right? At the beginning, it's, okay, yeah, well, Ned was not your friend, but he was also He was an ally to you, right? He wanted you to be king, all those type of things. But then you mentioned the Siege of Storm's End, something that Ned took basically all the credit for. And I don't mean like Ned was trying to, but he's the one that gets all the credit, not Stannis. Another slight that Stannis has had to suffer. And it will remind him of all the other slights by Robert. Stannis says Ned acted under Robert's orders, not from affection. And that's true, but I mean, Ned also would have lifted the siege, or at least helped lift the siege. So it's another kind of weird thing to say from Stannis, even though you understand it, because it's the way Stannis' mind works. They were Robert's orders, not Ned. Ned didn't go out of his way to free Stannis. It was because of Robert. He asserts that he deserved to be Hand of the King and resents Ned taking the role. Still, he promises Catelyn justice for Ned's murder. They both say, like, we'll avenge Ned, but it doesn't really seem to be like they're implying they're going to avenge Ned. They just need to kill these people and are trying to justify it in a way. It's kind of the way it comes off to me. But I also think it's interesting is right away we're seeing the internal conflicts that Stannis has, right? He feels slighted because he wasn't made Hand of the King, because he never felt, the love of his brother, or they never had a good relationship. It's kind of all coming out right to begin this meeting. And so if you're Catelyn, this is going really badly, right? You're already putting Stannis in a bad mood, in a bad place. And Stannis, in a lot of ways, has placed himself in that situation, but it's not a good start, especially when you're trying to get Stannis and Renly to see eye to eye and work together. Beginning at page 355, Catelyn reflects bitterly that kings love to promise heads. Both brothers had promised her justice, but she values her daughter's return more. Catelyn realizes that Ned is dead. There's nothing that she can do about that, but she can save her children. And that is the intelligent thing to be thinking here. Now, what she's going to do later on is not so intelligent, but here, this thought process is very intelligent. She reminds Stannis that Sansa is still being held by Cersei, and Arya has been missing since Robert's death, which is very interesting because this is going to come up later on when we get to the Battle of the Blackwater. But Stannis promises to send her daughters to her if found when he takes King's Landing, also implying that could be possibly dead, which is kind of likely at this point. Arya has not been heard of. Likely she's dead, and maybe the Lannisters have covered it up. That's what I would be thinking from an outsider's point of view here. But also, if they do take the castle, if Stannis is taking the castle, Cersei's going to have Sansa killed. We see that was the original plan anyway. So Stannis is kind of right. Like, the chances of Catelyn getting her daughters back are very slim to none. It's something that, again, Catelyn is realizing. It's why she's going to trade Jaime for her daughters, because she realizes that there's no chance of getting her daughters back at this point. Catelyn questions why Stannis is at Storm's End and not attacking the capital. It is interesting. Stannis brings this up, right? Why aren't you taking King's Landing? You're staying in. But it's quite obvious, right? If you can see Stannis' army, like, you realize he just does not have the men. Stannis replies that to take King's Landing, he needs the support of the Southern Lords, currently sworn to Renly, which we already knew to be the case. That's a lot of what we focus on in Davos 1 and in the prologue. He states that he needs to win them over from his brother. And Catelyn suggests reconciliation, noting the Lords swore to Robert and to House Baratheon. And yes, in theory, they should work together. The problem is going to be, Stannis is not well liked. These lords chose Renly over choosing Stannis. Stannis might have the rightful claim, which we know to be correct at this point, but it doesn't matter if nobody wants him to be king, and that's the issue he's running into here. Stannis insists that he has no quarrel if Renly is dutiful, but he demands obedience as the rightful king, as Stannis should, right? Regardless of what you want to say with Stannis, Stannis is 100% in the right here in terms of his claim, right? This is based on the legal system of Westeros. Stannis is 100% correct. He asks if House Stark supports Renly. He asks openly, because why would Catelyn be arriving with Renly's party and be at this meeting? What are the Starks up to? That's what I'd be thinking if I'm Stannis. Have they already gone with Renly's side? Is there a point to this? Catelyn says her son Robb is king in the north, sworn by his lords, and offers friendship, not fealty. This is another slight. If you're Stannis, you're sitting here going, wait a minute, you just took half of my kingdom away. This is not how the legal system of Westeros works. When I become king after Robert, as I should, why all of a sudden does the North and the Riverlands get to now claim they're independent? That's not how things work. And so Stannis is once again gonna go, you're offering friendship that should already be mine. That's how I'd view it if I'm Stannis. The Starks, the Tully, should be loyal to me. Ned Stark, the person that was in charge of the Starks, believe that I should be king. So that's the way I would interpret this if I'm Stannis, and that's why I think he gets so aggravated by this conversation. Stannis declares that kings have no friends, only subjects and enemies. It's a really interesting take on kingship. It is something where you have to really be careful with friends, right? Do are people really your friends? Are they trying to gain things? All of the things you think about with Jon in A Dance with Dragons, where he thinks about Ned's teachings and how, he sends his friends away in book 5. It's interesting because Stannis kind of has that same idea. Stannis has that same kind of thought process in terms of friends, but we also know it's more because Stannis, somebody that doesn't find much happiness in his life, he's a bit socially awkward. It's just something that he has never really had, like friends. Like he doesn't look at Davos as a friend. He looks at him as maybe a loyal subject, someone that he can count on, but maybe not necessarily a friend. Renly arrives behind Catelyn, bright and regal in green velvet with a crown of golden roses. His banner is carried by another woman, Brienne of Tarth. But nobody can really tell that unless you know what her armor is because she's all covered up. She carries the standard with the crowned stag flying on a golden field. Stannis greets him curtly as Lord Renly. You think about the differences here. Renly looks the part of a king. He looks more flamboyant. He's all more in this color scheme, right? Where Stannis is dressed very plainly. Renly's the complete opposite. I think the show, at least on that part of it, got it right. How Stannis looks in the show, he's very, plain for the most part, versus Renly, who shows up and has, in my opinion, Renly has one of the coolest looks in all of Game of Thrones. Like, I really love the crown they did for that in the show. His actual attire, it kind of fits what I feel like he looks like in the books. And so I do want to give a shout out to the showrunners for that part of Renly's speech. That scene, they cut out a really big part of it. They really like to cut out Stannis' character development in the show, and it really bothers me because it comes very apparent in season 2, but we'll get there. Renly playfully insists on King Renly and jokes about not recognizing Stannis' new banner. He asks whose banner Stannis bears, referencing the very different banner that is not very Baratheon looking like at all. But I think it's interesting, we just talked about how Stannis didn't really care about, the whole idea of being called Lord Stannis by Catelyn, and right away, Renly is the complete opposite, correcting Stannis about being king. As we get into page 356, Stannis answers Renly that the new banner is his own. The Red Priestess explains it is the fiery heart of the Lord of Light, now Stannis' sigil. Renly then jokes that the shared banners would confuse the battlefield. It is kind of showing, though, if you look at Stannis' banner, it is kind of weird in terms of if you're a Westerosi person and you see this, other religion being on the banner, that this culture, that Stannis right now is very much not with the old gods or the new gods, it isolates him quite heavily. Catelyn, though, tries to step in, urging for peace, saying they share a common enemy. But Stannis refuses, declaring anyone who denies his right to the throne is his foe. We get that iconic line. And I, in my opinion, agree with Stannis, albeit I know Stannis and Renly should work together, and maybe Stannis should try and make some compromises here. But Stannis is right. Like, anyone that's denying him the right to the throne, they are in the wrong. Based off the legal system, Stannis is the heir. Renly retorts that the whole realm denies Stannis' claim, even the unborn. And this is where we get into the ideological differences between the two. Renly believes that the person that has the most popularity should be the king, whereas Stannis believes the person with the right legal claim should be the king. Stannis continues being angry, regrets breaking his vow never to speak with Renly while he wore a crown. Stannis realizes that this was not going to go well. Stannis knows who his brother Renly is. He knows that Renly is playing at being a king and all of this stuff. He was just coming here to antagonize Stannis, really. But Catelyn criticizes them both, naming the Lannisters as the real threat, Tywin at Harrenhal, forces at the Golden Tooth, and Casterly Rock, and Cersei in King's Landing. And again, Catelyn is completely right. All three of the major kings right now in play with Robb, Renly, and Stannis have one big enemy, the Lannisters. Even if they don't plan to ally with each other and let the North be its own separate thing, which I totally don't blame Renly or Stannis for, they should at least make an alliance, a ceasefire between the three of them to defeat the Lannisters. Now, if you're Renly, the chips are kind of on his hand. He has all the power. He doesn't need to do this. And so that's kind of the issue you kind of run into. She continues noting that Robb Stark, her son, is the only one truly fighting them, while Renly kind of plays at being a king and Stannis is sieging Storm's End. Renly dismisses the concern, confident he will win the war and can delay facing the Lannisters, which he's completely correct, right? The more time he kind of waits, well, King's Landing is going to starve even more. The people will turn against the Lannisters even farther, like we're going to see in the coming chapters. You look at Robb, he is just bloodying the Lannisters at this point, making them weaker and weaker. But Renly, again, is right. Renly's strategy is not a bad strategy whatsoever. Stannis demands any proposals be made quick. Stannis doesn't want to come to this meeting and talk to Catelyn and Renly if nothing is ever going to be struck up, right? If nobody's going to bend the knee, then what's the point? Let's just get on with things. Renly then proposes for Stannis to kneel and swear allegiance to him, which everybody and their mother knows Stannis would never do. Stannis refuses angrily, calling Renly a thief and a usurper, and Stannis is not wrong to think those things. But Renly goes into kind of his ideology of why he believes he should be king, with Renly replying that Robert bore the title of usurper and he handled it just fine. And he also goes back to this idea that Robert was a conqueror, right? Robert took down the Targaryen dynasty. It wasn't necessarily about him having the right claim, it was about him having the power. Catelyn scolds them both, saying if they were her sons, she'd lock them in a room until they remembered that they were brothers. It's not as easy as that, especially when you think about how the two grew up, right? Not really having a mother and father in their lives for that long. You look at the age difference between Renly and Stannis. It's just a very different situation that Catelyn really just doesn't understand. And you think about the differences between them, it's not the same, unfortunately. And I want to give Catelyn, a little bit of the benefit of the doubt because I don't think there was going to ever be a conclusion between Renly and Stannis. There was no peaceful way this could have been resolved. It was going to come to violence one way or the other. Unfortunately, we see how that goes down. Stannis coldly tells her she presumes too much and calls Robb a traitor too, warning his day will come as well. Now, this is not a good move by Stannis. Again, I understand why Stannis says it because it is the truth. Robb, he is somebody that is now named himself independent from the Seven Kingdoms. He is a rebel just as much. But if you're Stannis, you should be making an alliance with Robb, and then maybe you deal with that afterwards, right? It's just not a good idea that when you're in the losing position right now, you have the least amount of men of the three factions right now, to then start threatening the other faction that's trying to be neutral. It's not a really good look. And that gets us to page 357. Another thing I want to point out that's also going to be foreshadowing into Catelyn and the way she thinks about Stannis and a little bit of Robb's fate as well. Catelyn, furious, challenges Stannis' right to call others traitors when he rebels against the crown's lawful heirs. Remember, Catelyn has been on the road this whole time. She does not know about Stannis' declaration about the children being bastards between Jaime and Cersei with the kids, with Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella. Renly mocks her ignorance, implying that she hasn't seen Stannis' infamous letter. And anybody that knows Stannis knows he would not start spreading rumors and stuff like that. That's not the way that Stannis does things. And so Renly kind of discounting the truth of Stannis' letter is a bit puzzling to me. I think that, in my opinion, it's because Renly probably already had his suspicions about the kids between Robert and Cersei actually being Robert's. I think more than this, it's more of performance. It's more of like a stage play, right? Because it's very convenient if this letter makes Stannis the heir. If Stannis is not the actual heir, like let's say Joffrey, Tom, and Myrcella are all the legitimate heirs, well, then it kind of discounts Stannis' claim, right? It kind of proves what Renly's trying to do, winning the crown by popularity. So, in a lot of ways, I think that Renly doesn't really want to admit that this is the truth, just based on the fact that it doesn't help his claim really at all. Stannis then bluntly declares Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella are all incest-born bastards, not Robert's children. Catelyn is shocked to hear this, barely able to believe Cersei would risk such madness. It's a completely stupid thing to think about. If you are Cersei, why would you possibly sleep with Jaime? It puts you in a terrible situation. Renly sarcastically calls the story clever, but demands proof. And Renly is right here. He is completely right to suggest that Stannis has no proof. And again, if you're Renly, I think that Renly understands this is probably true. But at the same time, like I said before, it's all kind of a performance. But Stannis, the reason that he's trying to get Storm's End is also for that proof because of Edric, the bastard of Robert. Catelyn asks why he never told Robert, referencing why didn't Stannis tell Robert. But Stannis explains it in a way that's kind of heartbreaking, right? Stannis didn't feel like he could go to his brother and tell him this news because it would make Stannis look like, oh, he was just trying to gain power. He was trying to become the heir. Robert wouldn't take it seriously. So Stannis explains he went to Jon Arryn instead, somebody that he knew Robert would trust. Renly scoffs, saying the only source is a dead man. Again, Renly is right. Like, there's not a lot of evidence that Stannis can supply. Stannis counters that Jon was poisoned to silence him, and he was gathering evidence. Renly mocks again, saying the proof died with Aaron. Both sides are kind of right here. Like, Renly is right to question, where is this proof? Stannis is basically just making claims at this point, but Stannis is also right to know, like, there's some sus stuff happening. Even though he doesn't have all the pieces fit together, if you were an outsider looking in, if you knew the information that Stannis did, this is the conclusion I would come to, that more than likely Jon Arryn was killed by one of the Lannisters, and specifically Cersei, even though that is not the case. Catelyn recalls Lysa Arryn's letter to her, accusing Cersei of Jon's murder and later blaming Tyrion. Stannis cynically says the queen and her brother are both snakes. It doesn't matter which one bit first. Now, I would beg the differ, throwing accusations everywhere, right? And then just saying the whole family's got to go. It's not the best idea because Tyrion is completely innocent of this stuff. Now, is Tyrion a major thorn for Stannis? Of course. But I would say we need to convict people of their actual crimes. As we get into page 358, this is then where we get to the iconic part of this chapter. I cannot believe that the show decided to cut this part of the Renly speech chapter. It makes zero sense to me. It really shows it's the big moment, right? It's the moment where it reflects both Stannis and Renly's personalities. As Renly begins to pull something out, he pulls out a peach and offers it to Stannis. Stannis, who had reached for his sword, thinking Renly maybe reached for his sword, he instantly goes to that. Stannis is all about seriousness and even believing that his brother could maybe try and kill him here. But it's actually just a fruit. And you might be thinking, well, why is this peach so significant? If you've never looked into kind of the analysis of Renly's peach, it's really important because Stannis refuses the peach and says he didn't come to eat. And Callan tries to refocus his conversation, but no, we go back to the peach. Renly says a man should never refuse a peach because life is short. And he references the Stark motto, winter is coming. And this is so interesting because what Renly is really saying is you should live your life to the fullest. You should take all the pleasures when they are offered to you. So things like food represent other things, pleasures, all that type of stuff. Renly is all about pleasures. That's all Renly's known. Renly has grown up into, a lot of privilege. He's somebody that's very rich. He loves great fabric, great clothing because maybe it makes him feel better, it makes him, look better, whatever. He cares about all of those things, the material side of the world. Stannis doesn't care about those things. Stannis has no happiness. He has no peach. If we're going to look at it from Renly's peach, Renly has too many peaches and Stannis has no peaches. That's the broken down kindergarten math, right? Stannis has really no happiness in his life. He's about doing actions and all of this stuff. He's driven by duty. Renly is driven by pleasures and the richness of the world. That's what he's driven by. Stannis replies that he didn't come to be threatened as he doesn't really understand the meaning of Renly's peach, something he will contemplate and will come back up in the story. Renly says he wasn't threatening him and offers Storm's End as a brother's gift, the same way Robert gave it to Renly. Terrible move. This is one of the things that Stannis hates being reminded of the most. I also want to go back actually to Renly's speech as well. It also foreshadows his death, right? Because he's saying, oh, you never know when life could, stop. Enjoy the pleasures while you can. Funny enough, Renly's going to die like right after this. But getting back to it, Storm's End is something that Stannis should already have had the right to. Stannis believes and wanted Storm's End his home. But no, he was given Dragonstone. We've talked about that at length throughout this reread, whether that was in book 1 or book 2. So I, we go back to those chapters if you want to hear my explanation on that idea. But in a lot of ways, this is a huge slight that Renly is now throwing into Stannis' face. Stannis already should have claim of Storm's End. Even with that being said, Stannis doesn't need to be given it by Renly. And Stannis says this exact point. Storm's End isn't Renly's to give. Renly jokes to Brienne about his brother refusing his peach, castle, and wedding invitation. And Stannis has some really nice zingers here as he accuses Renly's wedding of being a farce and reminds him he once planned to make Margaery one of Robert's mistresses. Stannis is completely correct. This marriage with Margaery is just a political marriage. It's for power. It has nothing to do with love or any of those other things. And that's even exemplified even more when you look at Renly trying to marry off his future wife to his older brother. it just tells you everything you need to know. Renly clarifies he intended her to be Robert's queen and says now she's his, still a maiden. And one of my favorite lines from Stannis instantly comes out as Stannis says, Marjorie will die a maid in Renly's bed. Insane zinger, and Stannis comes clapping back. Renly gets a lot of the jabs in this one, but Stannis every once in a while just has some haymakers. Renly mocks Stannis for having no sons himself and makes a crude joke about his wife and a fool. See, we see even that Renly has found out this rumor that has been spread by Cersei's council, especially Littlefinger and Varys, and it's something that just gets under Stannis' skin as it gets Stannis to draw his sword, which shines unnaturally to Catelyn. Catelyn's horse even shies back at the sword's glow. Brienne instantly steps between the brothers with her own sword, ordering Stannis to put his away. Catelyn thinks bitterly that Cersei must be laughing at the scene, which she definitely is. It just tells you how everything has just gone wrong, right? We're at swords now. These two brothers are willing to kill each other. And this isn't something where we see with like Robb, where he draws a sword because he's young and all that stuff. When Stannis draws a sword, he means to act. This isn't something where he's acting like, irrational or not being mature. He means to use it. As we get into page 359, and there's other questions about it being Lightbringer and that stuff, and it doesn't seem to be so because it doesn't have the warmth of the sword, something that Aemon references here, but it is a lot of attention brought to it. Stannis threatens Renly with his shining sword, offering him a chance to reconsider his defiance before dawn, promising him Storm's End, a seat on the council, and the title of his heir if he bends the knee. If Renly refuses, Stannis vows to destroy him. Let's look at the offers that each side gives the other. Stannis offers to give Renly the heir, which basically means Renly's going to be king. Stannis has no male heirs, he just has Shireen, so by law, Renly would be king in that regard. He also allows him to keep Storm's End, get his seat on the council. Stannis actually gives things to Renly, whereas Renly offers Stannis nothing. Now, again, that kind of goes back to the power dynamic here. Stannis has no power versus Renly having all the power, or that's the alleged idea here. We know that Stannis has power through Melisandre, but if you're looking at it, if you're Renly here, he has all the cards to deal. Stannis doesn't really have much to deal with. Renly dismisses Stannis' threat with amusement, pointing out the larger forces supporting him. He lists several houses, including the Tyrells, the Rowans, Tarleys, Carons, and many others who will help him win the throne. He also notes the thousands of swords and spears he has at his disposal, contrasting it with Stannis' smaller and less well-equipped army. Renly suggests that Stannis' forces, numbering only around 5,000 and made up of ragtag men, will be easily defeated in battle. And Renly is 100% correct. If this comes to a battle, Stannis is going to lose. He doesn't have the men. Yes, Renly made kind of a dash to get to Storm's End with most of his horse, but again, once the rest of his army gets here, it's going to be even worse odds for Stannis. Stannis, while clearly angry, remains calm and confident, stating they will see the outcome come dawn. He eventually sheaths his sword and rides off. Stannis should be confident. Stannis knows what's going to happen. He knows that Melisandre is going to do this magic or whatnot to take out Renly. Now, what's really interesting here, if you're Stannis, is this hasn't been tried yet, right? Like, this is going to be the first time that this magic is tried. Stannis, I wonder if he has any doubt, right? If it's actually going to work. If this is going to be the last time he sees his brother. But as of right now, he doesn't seem to show any of that inconfidence here. He shows that he's very confident. Melisandre then adds on to this, staying behind a moment and warning Renly to look to his own sins before leaving. Another great line. This chapter has a lot of great quotes. Catelyn and Renly return to camp where Renly comments on the interaction, saying it was amusing, though not terribly productive. He expresses a casual attitude towards the confrontation. It's really interesting to think about how Renly plays this off as a joke. This is going to decide the fate of his brother, his family. And he's kind of laughing it off. It kind of tells you a lot of the differences between Renly and Stannis. Renly speculates on the truth of Stannis' accusation about Joffrey's parentage, wondering if the claim that Joffrey is the Kingslayer's son is true. If you're Renly, you probably don't know 100% if this is true. I think that Renly is, again, kind of playing on a little bit of performance for Catelyn, because in a lot of ways, Renly doesn't need this to be true for his claim. His claim has no backing by the legal system. It is all about popularity. And Catelyn, who is taking this much worse, she kind of remains in silence. She knows what this means. Two brothers going to battle, it's not a good omen. her concern growing about the looming battle and the political and familial and the familial tensions at play. And Catelyn also is realizing this is not good for Robb, right? This is taking more time away with the battle with the Lannisters. It's just isolating Robb against the whole might of the Lannisters more and more every single day. And Renly and Stannis not coming together is kind of a massive blow because you could have Stannis, one of the best military commanders, with Renly, who's a great politician. And then you mix that also with Robb and the Blackfish, who are great tacticians. For Catelyn, this is the worst case scenario, as that gets us into page 360. Now, Renly, in my opinion, does have some wisdom here. Now, we do realize it is self-serving why he says this, but he admits that Stannis is the lawful heir to the throne, but he argues that the law that makes the eldest son king is foolish, something I 100% agree. It should be the person that has the best qualifications and who is going to do the best job for the kingdom, not by blood. But again, Renly is kind of using that to his own gain. He believes the crown would suit him better as he lists off his all of these different things that he thinks he's so great at. It just comes off as very arrogant, something that Catelyn instantly calls out. Catelyn feels disheartened by the situation. She realizes the two Baratheon brothers will likely end up fighting each other, while her son Robb will be forced to face the Lannisters alone. She laments that her attempts to mediate were in vain and contemplates returning to Riverrun to bury her father and finding comfort only in her role as a mourner. Catelyn realizes how helpless she truly is, right? A lot of it is because of one, her sex. People will always count her out because she's a woman and she shouldn't be at councils and all that stuff. But yet, here she has the smartest council of everyone, in my opinion. Everything's gone wrong. It's a very depressing chapter because it has this looming feeling over the story. It's one of the most important moments here is what happens with Renly and Stannis. It will dictate how the power grab will work within the War of the Five Kings. I remember watching this in season 2. I watched season 1 through season 4 before I had read the books. And I remember, watching this part of the show and just being hooked. The War of the Five Kings is my favorite part of the series and of, George R. R. Martin's work. And this is kind of at the climax of it. This is the big heightened moment of this book. Catelyn thinks about Renly's camp, which is positioned on a low ridge and is more organized than Stannis' larger, more chaotic encampment. When Renly learned of Stannis' attack on Storm's End, he split his forces. He left behind his large foot army, siege equipment, and supply wagons at Bitterbridge, taking only his knights and free riders to engage Stannis. Renly is playing the number game. Renly realizes he has more men than Stannis does, and the better quality as well. He should be able to take down Stannis with no problem. Renly's rushed decision to head east mirrors Robert's impulsive nature, though without the balance of Ned Stark's caution. And in his haste, Renly had outpaced his supply lines and left his army vulnerable to starvation if they don't engage soon. Interesting, given the fact we know Stannis will be in a similar situation in Book 5, but I kind of disagree with Catelyn here. If you're Renly, you want to deal with this threat swiftly. You want to get rid of Stannis. If you're gonna go all the way to Storm's End, you want to get it out of the way quickly. Because again, you still have a very large host. It takes a long time for them to move. You don't want to be going, all these different areas. You want to take care of the problem, pretty swiftly. And Renly is right to be confident his army is vastly superior to Stannis's, albeit Stannis is a better commander. Catelyn and Renly return to the royal pavilion where Renly's captains and bannermen are waiting for news of the parley. Renly tells them that Stannis has not changed and will not be appeased by castles or diplomacy, even though Renly didn't really offer any type of diplomacy. When you're negotiating, you have to give up things. Renly gave up nothing, or is not offering to give up anything. He implies that he is prepared to fight his brother. Now, this is where we get to a very interesting point of the story. I made a video about this on my main channel, probably like a year or two ago, but I asked the question of, if you were in Renly's position, would you actually attack Stannis? I am someone that thinks we shouldn't. I would go with what Lord Mathis Rowan says here. I would not attack Stannis. You don't need to. Why make yourself a kinslayer, something that people do not look upon you? Well, why not just leave, right? Why not leave maybe a fraction of your forces or come back to Stannis later on? You're not going to just all of a sudden lose all your power and strength, and so Stannis is able to win or something like that. That's just never going to happen. You could go to King's Landing. You could go deal with the Lannisters. Stannis is not going to grow in power, right? He's a very minor player at this point of the game. And so I definitely agree with Mathis Rowan. Like, Storm's End is well defended. It's well supplied. Stannis is not really in a good position. They should just go ahead with the rest of their plans, go take King's Landing, get the seat of legitimacy, and deal with Stannis later, or send a man like, Randall Tarley to deal with Stannis later on down the war. And that's really what Lord Mathis Rowan suggests. Beginning on page 361, this is not met with agreement. A lot of people actually disagree with him. In a lot of ways feels like Catelyn when she says, let's make peace with the Lannisters. Same kind of reaction. As we get into page 361, Lord Randall Tarley urges Renly to fight Stannis immediately, arguing that leaving Stannis unchecked will only allow him to grow stronger, which could make him a more dangerous opponent in the future. He warns that by the time Renly deals with the Lannisters, Stannis might be just as strong or stronger. This makes no sense. I'm sorry. How is Stannis going to get stronger by sieging Storm's End, where he doesn't have the supplies to withstand a very long siege? He doesn't have the men to do so. Who's going to flock to his banner? If you're worried about the Starks are half a continent away and have to get through, your army to even get to Stannis. The Lannisters, the Westermen, are not going to come to Stannis' aid. The Dornish likely are not going to side with Stannis. He's in the losing position. Where are these swords and power that Stannis is going to get? And that's what I would very much question here with Randall Tarley's advice. But many of the other lords and bannermen agree with Tarley's assessment and support the idea of fighting Stannis sooner rather than later, seeing him as a direct threat. Renly decides to engage Stannis in a lot of ways because of pride. He doesn't want to be viewed as fearing his brother or having some weakness against him, which doesn't really matter. He already has all the power. This really is just about pride, in my opinion. He declares that they will fight despite the risks being involved. Catelyn, seeing the inevitable conflict, requests to return to Riverrun, which completely understandable. She can't do anything else here. Why watch the slaughter? Stating that she came to Renly as an envoy and no longer wishes to be part of the war. She expresses disappointment that her hopes for peace have failed. Renly refuses her request to leave, stating that she will remain as an envoy and will witness the battle firsthand, so she can tell her son Robb about the consequences of rebellion. He assures her she will be safe during the conflict. It's all a game to Renly. This is all a play. Oh, Catelyn, you need to watch this so you can tell Robb how strong and powerful I am. It just comes off as immature and a little bit petty. Renly starts making military arrangements as Lord Mathis Rowan will lead the center, Lord Bryce the left, Renly himself will command the right, and Lord Estermont will be in charge of the reserve. The discussion then goes down to who should be in the vanguard. Again, it's just more politics, right? Who is going to get this great position when it really shouldn't be that? This is war. You're leading men to go slaughter other men or for you to be slaughtered. It's not something you should necessarily be fighting over, but it tells you the idea of what Catelyn said in her last chapter. These are the Knights of Summer. Sir John Fossoway requests the honor, but Sir Gyard the Green argues it should go to one of the 7 Kingsguard, as Lord Randall Tarley dismisses Gyard's suggestion, boasting his own experience. Renly settles the argument by naming Sir Loras Tyrell the Knight of Flowers to lead the vanguard, as Loras eagerly accepts the honor, requesting Renly's blessing and asking to carry both Renly's banner and his own, the Rose, into battle. Now, this is something I want to talk about here because something I've theorized and crafted is I believe the reason Mace Tyrell will lose his battle against young Griff, or they at least won't fight, is because I think that some of the lords of the Reach will turn against him, and I think one of them will be Randall Tarley. Think about what just happened here. Randall Tarley, by far the most experienced man militarily here, gets passed over for Loras Tyrell, who's never been in a real battle. He's still fresh. I mean, he's a great tournament knight, but never actually been in a true battle. This is another slight, and we see that these slights continue. This isn't the only time this happens. It's something that I think is going to push Randall Tarley to young Griff's side, more than likely. But we also know why Renly has a little bit of favoritism towards Loras. No further explanation really needed, as we get into page 362. Renly calls for Brienne to be this person that goes Loras, who is still in her blue steel armor, and reminds her that she is one of the 7 sworn shields. She insists on staying by Renly's side, but Renly tells her that the 4 others will be with him in the battle. Brienne does not want to risk Renly dying. She is basically in love with him. She wants to be with him and not with Loras. Brienne then tries one last desperate request as she kneels and requests the honor of arming Renly for battle, a gesture that Catelyn recognizes as an expression of love, right? Brienne has a massive crush on Renly, and for legitimate good reasons, but Catelyn pities Brienne. She realizes what everybody else realizes. Renly's, for one, a married man, And also, he doesn't really seem to like women. Maybe he's bisexual, but doesn't really seem to indicate that from the story, in my opinion. But let's continue. Renly grants Brienne's request, then orders everyone to leave, saying even kings need rest before battle. Catelyn then asks for one last request from Renly, for leave to go pray at a nearby sept, as she wishes to seek divine guidance, not just for victory, but for wisdom. Renly agrees and orders Sir Robar Royce to escort her. If you're Catelyn, you've done all you can, right? You've done everything you possibly can to avoid the scenario. She needs to find some inner peace and to escape this camp, this war that is continuing to happen for no real good reason. Renly tells Loras to stay and help him pray. I doubt they're going to pray, but, who knows with Renly. He then gives orders for his men to be in place by dawn, preparing for battle with Stannis. As Catelyn leaves the pavilion with Sir Robar, she reflects on him. She notices him as one of Bronn Yon's sons. Again, it's really weird that a Vale Knight would be in this army with Renly, but it does tell you a lot about Renly's draw, how he draws men to him. A young and comely knight who is renowned for his skills in tourneys, Renly has gifted him a rainbow cloak and red armor, making him one of his 7. It's really also another big honorable praise as well, getting into a Kingsguard. Catelyn inquires why Sir Robar is involved in this battle, given that his family serves House Arryn, not Renly. He explains that he made Renly his king and chose to fight for him, acknowledging that a second son must seek glory where he can. It really reminds you of Daemon Targaryen from the Dance with the Dragons time period or Fire and Blood. It really reminds you of that. This is a man seeking, honor and all these other things, and so he flocks to Renly's cause. And Renly is somebody that people love. It's just going back to that whole idea is, should the person ruling be somebody that's the most popular or the legal idea of who should be king? Catelyn notes Sir Robar's youth. He's no older than 21, the same age as Renly. She contrasts him with her son Robb, thinking that Robb, despite being younger, has more wisdom than this young knight. I agree. I do agree. I think Robb is a bit smarter than Robar Royce, but Robb makes his own mistakes, and this is in a lot of ways kind of reflecting that he's going to do that. But getting into page 363, the last page of the chapter, in Catelyn's small corner of the camp, Shad is preparing food, slicing carrots into a kettle, while Hal Mullen is chopping alongside 3 of his Winterfell men. Lucas Blackwood is seen sharpening his dagger, as Lucas notices Catelyn asks her if the rumor about battle at dawn is true. Catelyn confirms that Hal's news is accurate, but mentally notes that Hal has a loose tongue. He didn't need to just hear this from Hal. Everybody in the camp would have been hearing this news already. This isn't something like that's a secret, right? And it's also something you would have been asking instantly. If you're one of these northern men, you're coming to a meeting between 2 different kings, the most likely outcome is going to be battle. Lucas then asks whether they will fight or flee, and Catelyn responds that they will pray, rather than making plans for battle or retreat. It's, for one, they're not allowed to retreat. Renly is not allowing them to leave, and also it's not their fight. So they're unfortunately going to be sidelined and be forced to watch the slaughter to come. Well, not really slaughter, but potential slaughter, what they think is going to happen. And that ends Renly's Peach or Catelyn 3. Again, I want to thank you guys for joining me in this one. One of my favorite chapters. It's the best chapter of this book for me personally. I'm glad, we got to get through about midpoint of the book. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about this chapter. There's a lot more to dissect. Again, I maybe didn't even hit every single point you can make with how perfectly and well written this chapter is. But I will see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.